place is ours today. The deal is help yourself to tea and coffee. Please don't spill the coffee everywhere. Just wait for it to filter through. That's how it works. There are no planned fires today or fire alarms. There are 2 fire exits, one on my left and the other one through the corridor, right down the steps, and meet in front of the Agra curry house. But as we said, there's no planned fire alarms today. This is our 3rd event in a set of work we're doing with DfT, which they asked us to get involved with after we've run Travel Hack 1 and 2 with Transport for the North. So the last 6 months of this year has been really focused around transport data for ODI Leeds, for North and the UK. So it's been a really interesting last 6 months of finding out how we can help people release data and create better services for loads of people. The way we're going to work today is we've got a set of lightning talks to set off with. Mira and Sherry from DfT are going to set the context from their perspective. We've got a set of lightning talks to share different views of what's happening from different parts of the ecosystem, and the more we work in this area, as I'm sure you all know, the more complex it becomes. What we assume is a very simple system of transport, buses, roads, fares, becomes ever more complex the more you look at it. And everyone's request is, can we make it a little bit more simple? And then the next request, we need a data strategy, and that's why we're here. And we have the Bus Services Act, which is adding another layer of complexity into that world. If you've not worked with ODI Leeds today, Tom's found up. Yeah. Everything we've done so far and everything we do today is going to be on the web. That's the way we work. Everything's going to be as radically open as we can be. There is just one web page. If you're online, just go to odileeds.org/events/databus. I'll show you here if you can see on the screen. That's our fantastic visualization that Amy's put together, a description of what we're doing, the events in London, Birmingham and Leeds, the running order for today, a collaboration document. If you have had a chance to look at that, that's a Google document that we're going to work on later, but if you've got ideas, thoughts, comments, photos, links, please start looking at that document and seeing where you can contribute. This is your chance to tell DfT what you would like to see in the regulations that are going to enact the Bus Services Act. So it's very important. We have a survey from DfT there, which again is another way of finding out what we think. So if you get a chance to do that, that'd be great. All the slides outputs from London, all the slides and output from Birmingham, the slides from today and the outputs from today are here. So if you get a chance to look at them, that's great. And then after we've done the lightning talks, we'll be diving into groups to answer some specific questions that we've developed after the work we've done in London and Birmingham. So what's fantastic is Leeds becomes the most important part of that transport ecosystem, which is a result. So we all know that instinctively, that we're in God's own country, and this is the most important part of any process, is to make sure it works in Yorkshire and that we learn from them. So I'll stop there. We will be doing the lightning talks. We'll take 2 or 3 questions at the end of each one. We've got some microphones that will run around and do that. And Mira, if you want to do the intro, and I'll load up Sherry's slides. So, thanks very much.
Okay, hello, so thanks everyone for coming. Really good to see the turnout. We've been really actually impressed by the turnout over the last couple of events. We've had about 50 to 60 in each event. And we really see this as a key opportunity to start a discussion between the operators, the bus operators, the local authorities, and also the digital and tech community. So thanks for engaging with us and helping us start that discussion. Really nice as well to see how many women there are here. It was quite noticeable when we were in London. I hope people don't mind me mentioning that, but yeah, I think it was one of the first things Sherry and I noticed. So London, we had about two women. So really good to see that the North is also representing gender equality as well. So yeah, that's great too. So what we're going to do is, so for the next 30 minutes, Sherry and I will do some scene setting. So we just want to explain a little bit to you. We'll do a little bit of scene setting about the buses in general. I do realise that for the bus operators and also for the local authorities, you probably already know quite a bit about buses. But for the digital community, for those of you who are here as tech developers, we're going to assume that there's variable levels of knowledge there. So we thought it might be useful just to do a little bit of scene setting there. We'll talk to you a bit about the Bus Services Act and essentially why the Bus Services Act was developed and what it hopes to achieve. And then we'll talk a little bit about what we're trying to achieve today. So we'll just set the tone for the rest of the day. And then you'll have an hour of lightning speakers. So we've got 7 speakers from 7 organisations who we see as key to this process, to the process of opening up bus data. And they're key for different reasons. They've either had achieved success in this area, they're currently working on projects in the space, they understand what passengers want, etc. So there'll be lots of different insights shared as part of the Lightning Speaker Series. Okay? Have you got the... Okay, thanks. Okay, so buses, some background and context. The UK obviously has a really proud history of buses. Buses go back, they're one of the oldest forms of transport, and they're actually one of the most, I think one of the most socially important forms of transport, so far more flexible than rail. Obviously, a new housing development pops up, it's much easier to put a bus service on than to create a railway. No infrastructure requirements needed to set up a bus service, so massively important. But actually, I think just in terms of social inclusion, that's really where buses make their mark. So we know that a significant proportion of bus journeys are undertaken by the disabled, by the elderly and by younger people, and they're really a key vehicle for to help people achieve independence. So buses are incredibly important to the UK economy, and whilst there's lots of positive things to say about buses, we're also aware that there are challenges faced in the market too. So I think that the Bus Services Act, which Sherry will tell you a bit more about, has come about because essentially if you look across the country, if you look across England, what you've got is a tale of 2 cities almost. So you look into London and about half of all bus journeys across the UK are undertaken within London, which obviously represents a real success. I think this year is probably the first year where we've seen a little bit of decline in the London bus market. So we have, I think in the past, the growth has continued. This year we've seen some decline. Generally, if you look across the rest of the UK, the pattern is one of decline. So I think there's been a 2% drop in bus passenger journey numbers this year. I don't think that really tells the story though. There are some areas that have achieved great success. So if you look at Merseyside, they've got the Bus Alliance, they've seen 16% growth. And although we talk about there being a little bit of decline in London this year, generally what they've seen is growth. So we know that buses work well, and where there are joint partnerships where operators and the bus operators and the authorities are working together, they can achieve great success. But we also know that there are parts of the country where it's just not working, and we need to do more, government needs to do more to help those areas, which is why we created the Bus Services Act. There are some other successes. So I think about 90% of local bus services and local buses across England are now PSVAR compliant. So that means they meet the public service vehicle accessibility regs, which is a real success. There's still some work to do on infrastructure, so stops and stations, which sit with the local authority. We know that they're lagging behind in terms of accessibility, but generally, there is a feeling that buses have made great progress in becoming a more accessible form of transport. So some real positives to tell, but there's work to do, and that is very much where the Act comes into play. So I'll hand you over to Sherry, and Sherry will talk to you a little bit about the Bus Services Act.
So basically the Bus Services Act came about because one of the things DfT collects statistics on is bus passenger numbers across England, and year after year we've seen that there's been a decline, particularly outside of London. So really what the Act contains is a series of measures to try and fix some of the issues that we see. So the Act contained franchising powers, so local authorities could franchise their services, similar to a model that we have in London, and also enhanced partnerships, so operators, local authorities working together and deciding together what things they want to implement in that area. And then last but not least, open data. So one of the things that we understand that it's sometimes a bit difficult for passengers to find out how to take the bus. So simple things like how much is it going to cost me? When is my bus going to arrive at the stop? It's a bit difficult sometimes for passengers to find out where to get this information. So the Bus Services Act reached Royal Assent on the 27th of April this year. And so within that, some of it's very specific in the types of information that we want to be able to have freely available to everyone. So that's fares, routes, timetables, real-time information, and any other information that might be about the service. So the secondary legislation is where the detail of how this is going to work, the processes, who's responsible for providing the information, all of that detail will be in the secondary legislation, which we intend to start drafting from early next year. So hopefully what this means, once this data is freely available to anyone who needs it, app developers, journey planner providers, we should see market growth. If people understand how to take the bus, we hope that instead of, just choosing the easy option and taking their car, they might start taking buses instead. So while we're doing these workshops is hopefully you will tell us how you think this should work. Obviously, you guys are the experts in here, so rather than us sitting in the office and trying to come up with the solutions ourselves, we want to make sure that the secondary legislation, when it comes out, that it's suitable for everyone and it works for operators and local authorities to work together to get this information out there. So we also want to make sure as well that any systems that we implement also works with the current systems in place. So for example, the electronic bus service registration, which has been around for quite a while, but the uptake hasn't been really good, and we're aware of the issues of that. So that's one of the things that we are looking towards as well. And also, we also want to know what kind of support is needed. So for things like real-time information, for example, we know that that depends on the equipment on the bus. Sometimes it's the local authorities that help operators with that. So if there's funding or any other type of support that you think DfT should be providing, we would love for you to tell us what that type of support looks like. Now, Mira, I'll hand over to Mira because she's now going to talk about the next steps of what DfT are doing and the discovery phase.
Okay, so I'll just talk to you a little bit about the work that's already underway within the department to essentially make open data a reality. So Sherry's touched on the policy or the development of the legislation. So we'll touch on that work stream, but actually we've also got a digital project underway. So at this point in time, we're just doing a discovery to think about who are our users, what their needs are, and what a final solution might look like. So I'll talk to you briefly about both of those work streams and the progress we intend to make during 2018. Okay. So as hopefully you'll have gathered from today's event and the other two events we've delivered, we want to really work closely with the industry. So we see this as a piece that will be co-owned, that although DfT are holding the pen in terms of the legislation, and some of the decisions. It's really important that it's driven by the industry and that you're part of that decision-making process. So what you'll see from us going forward is lots of engagement, so there'll be more events, there'll be public consultations, etc. So we want to really work closely with you to deliver open data. We've got a new senior responsible owner for the Bus Open Data Programme, so that's Katrina Henderson. So she's a very experienced civil servant, worked within Department for Transport for many years, and is a very strong programme manager as well. So we're quite confident that we've got the right people on board. And then we've got a wider team. So we've got Toby, who's just sat. Raise it higher, Toby. So this is Toby Stassen-Bevan. So Toby's our agile practitioner in the Bus Open Data team. But Toby will be working with us on the digital project. We've got Sherry, who's our policy lead on Bus Open Data. So Sherry will be working quite intensely on the secondary legislation. And myself, who has day-to-day oversight of the projects and the programme. And then we've got Ben Whitehouse, who's not here today, but Ben's our programme director, so he'll be giving a steer. I'm working very closely with Katrina to make sure we're on the right track, we make the right decisions, and what we do fits within wider government objectives. Okay. So, and as I said, we really see the bus operators, the local authorities, and the digital and the developer community as key to this. So we see you as major stakeholders in this process, and we'll be looking to talk to you as much as possible. So I'll just run through quickly each of these strands. So digital, I'm guessing more of you are probably more, most of you are more familiar with the digital side, particularly those people from the open data community. Does everyone know what a discovery project is? Okay, so you've got a bit of a mixture there. Okay, so I imagine the digital people probably know a bit more about what discovery is, as opposed to local authorities and bus operators. But I mean, basically, we've got a digital project which is at discovery stage currently, and all discovery refers to is it's a program of user research. So it'll be a 10-week project. We'll go and talk to the users who are the operators, the local authorities, the digital community, amongst others. There are other stakeholders too. And we'll be working with those groups to understand what is it specifically that you need to make open data work. So what type of a platform would you need to work with your business models? What is achievable? And how you use the data, etc. So that 10-week project should finish at the end of February. And by then we will have a set of user stories. We'll have a set of user needs or requirements, and we'll start to think about the final solution. So we'll have some options for the final solution. And then really once that discovery project is complete at the end of February, we'll be in a stronger position to make decisions about next steps, certainly from a digital perspective. From a policy point of view, so can I just ask, does everyone know the difference between primary and secondary legislation? Okay, so when we talk about that. Yes, yeah, but I think, do you know what it means? I think the name will tell you something, but I think the question I'm asking is, does it mean something to you if we refer to primary legislation or secondary legislation? I mean, generally, the primary legislation is the Bus Services Act, which came into effect in April, which Sherry highlighted. So that paves the way for us to then develop regulations on specific areas. So what we don't have yet is the secondary legislation. We don't have the regulations for open data, which means we don't quite know yet how it's going to work in practice. So that is the process that will be underway across this year. So at the moment we're evidence gathering, and there'll be a period of developing policy proposals which will start in early 2018. We've got a public consultation planned in the summer of 2018. And then really when we're starting to get into the autumn of 2018, we'll have some, we'll start to draft the regulations. And we've got a date to lay regulations in February of 2019. So it's realistically, we're going into 2019 before we actually have any legislation. And then naturally there'll be an implementation programme that follows as well. So that means we'll be working very closely with the industry to make sure that everyone can work with the regs. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll. Mhm. Okay. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Mm. Yeah, so I would absolutely agree, and I think we actually want the same things. My personal view on it would be that open data is an absolute must-have to make that happen. And actually, you're right that some of the operators will get on board and do this without legislation, but some won't, and some will need support to do it. And we can only really offer support if there's a legislative mandate to do that. So I think I'd say probably about 80% will do it, but there's 20% who are really going to need some help and support to make that happen. And what we don't want to do is push people out of the industry who provide really important bus services just because they're a bit smaller and they don't necessarily have the digital expertise. So I think these are really important questions to discuss. I have a view, I'm sure others will have a view too, so let's have that discussion today. Okay. Okay, so as we've just gotten from my last response, we want to develop a process that works for everyone. I think what's really on our minds is that we know that in the bus industry we've got a long tail of operators, and a number of small, quite a lot of small operators who provide really important services, who maybe have very small back office functions and don't necessarily have the digital expertise or capability to meet the open data regs quickly or easily. So what we want to do is work with everyone, but those groups in particular, to think about actually if we do this, what needs to be stipulated, maybe what additional provisions need to be made for those SMEs, and what support is needed across the piece to actually help you meet the digital challenge. And ultimately, I think the end game is that we want passengers, as Sherry said before, to be able to make better and more informed transport decisions, to be able to make multimodal journeys that are well planned and punctual, timely, and ultimately easy. I think the purpose of today is very much, so this isn't a public consultation exercise, I just want to make that absolutely clear. We're calling these early engagement sessions, so this is very much about just saying hello, starting a discussion, getting you thinking about it, maybe making some contacts as well, and learning from other bus operators or other local authorities, and making some contacts with the digital community, making sure you've got some information so that when we go into public consultation next year, you're alive to the fact that it's coming and or informed enough to comment in the public consultation. We really want to get your views and your insights to help us develop the policy proposals ahead of the consultation. And the kinds of things that we'll want to talk to you about are, so I've mentioned about the SME issue and making sure that we develop something that fits for everyone. The other things are, do you have a view on maybe the type of platform that we might want to use? Real-time information, do you have a view on who the bus operators, you've got your AVL systems, what about real-time information? Do you want the local authorities to continue to pick that up, or is it something you want to do? So there's lots of different questions. The questions are in the collaboration document, so my ask would be for the facilitators to be mindful of the questions in the collaboration document and put those to your groups, but also for the groups to be mindful that the questions are in there. So have a look at what's of interest to you and make sure you get your views across. I think Paul's mentioned that we've got a survey, so the survey will come afterwards. We probably want to also share your contacts. So for those of you who are here, we've got an attendee list with your contact details. We probably want to share that amongst the group so that people can keep in touch after the events. If anyone's got any objection to that, do let us know, and I think Paul and the ODI team will send out an email. So do make sure you raise, if you do have an objection, let us know, but otherwise we'll be sharing your contact details amongst this closed group. And that's really it. Just drink lots of tea and coffee, eat biscuits, talk to one another, make sure you fill in the collaboration document so that we know what you've said, and come and have a chat with us as well if there's something that's really on your mind that you want to kind of have a chat about in person. And otherwise, just have fun.
Yeah, so we've done it 3 times. I've just only spot that typo now, so it just shows you. Sorry, guys. So, as we said, we'll be cracking on, and the first up is, I think it's Alex rather than Richard from TFN, and they're going to tell us about what open data means for Transport for the North. So I am doing this live so you can all see how you can access the slides. So it's they're all live. They're on the Google Drive, you can download them, and if you've got PowerPoint you can look at them. So we've got an hour to do 7 talks. Yeah. Alex?
Thank you. Oh, great. Cheers.
I'm just going to load this up now. So you've got 8 slides. You've probably got about 50 seconds per slide.
No pressure, yeah.
No pressure as I just break.
Okay. Morning, everyone. I'm Alex Swillow. I'm from Transport for the North. And you can go to the next one, yeah? Cool. So, basically, Transport for the North, for those of you who don't know, it's a statutory, it will be. It's basically a partnership organisation that was formed in 2014. It's got we're having a bit of a technical issue.
No,
it's moving on there, but not on.
Yeah, so if you just use,
Okay.
look at that, it's great.
I can look at this. But
Notes on the thing.
sorry. Yeah, so I'll just carry on. So, Transport for the North, we've got 19 local transport authorities. We've got a group of local enterprise partnerships from across the north. And basically, we've really formed to kind of work with Department for Transport, HS2, Highways England, to give the north like one voice really, to bid for investment. So it's very much about local empowerment and economic development, and we're doing things for the first time really like on behalf of the Northern Geography, and trying to drive that agenda. So it's not just about planning on paper. We also want to move into delivering things through our partners in the future as well. So you can see from that map there, that's our region really that we'll be covering, right the way from Cheshire and Yorkshire up to the Scottish borders. And we've also working with partners in the devolved administrations in Scotland and Wales as well. So at the moment, we're just a partnership organisation. We don't actually really exist from a legal standpoint. We're kind of piggybacking on the back of other people, but we're going to become England's first subnational transport body, which we're really excited about. It doesn't sound that exciting, but really what that's going to enable us to do is work as a statutory partner with Department for Transport, and the Secretary of State's committed to that, and that's going to be from April 2018. So at that point, we'll be formally involved in that decision-making process and bidding for money and driving the economic agenda really for the north of England. We're going to, I think that's not meant to move back, but really it's we're going to be able to bid for and be involved in the franchise process. Not bid for franchises, I mean, sorry, but actually be involved in the assessment of them and setting the specification and procurement stuff. And we'll also the statutory status will also enable us to deliver this smart travel program that I'm working on, as well as kind of coordinate local authority funding better. So, for instance, if local authorities are wanting to bid for money to improve some local bottlenecks in their area, but the economic case isn't there, perhaps if we can coordinate that with other local authorities, we've got a better chance of bidding for that money. So I'm working on the Integrated and Smart Travel programme, and I'm particularly interested in what we call Tranche 2 of that programme, which is all about delivering a few things. So fares is one of the first things that we want to solve. We know that, for instance, unless you're travelling by rail, it's quite difficult for you to get information about how much your public transport journey is going to cost. You might have to contact a number of different operators. You might have to even ask the bus driver. So we want to create a single store, really, of fares data from operators, not just bus operators, but mainly bus operators for the north of England. We also want to create a single store for disruption messages. So at the moment, local authorities collect planned disruption information if there's going to be a marathon or construction that closes roads, and we want to coordinate that. So we've been working with local authorities to develop specification for that. We're also really committed to making that data open where we've got that permission to do so. So we need to develop a single place really for the north where all of this fares and disruption messaging is there, so that we can we can share that. This slide really talks about what we call our interconnected open data ecosystem. So we've been working with transport operators and Travel Line in particular to talk about gathering fares data, what are the boundaries, how we can get that, and we've managed to get some of that, and at the moment, and we're kind of starting to work with that and test on that in a pilot project with Travel Line at the moment, which has been really, really beneficial to us. We're also starting to develop a specification for a shared disruptions solution for the north of England, and we're working with local transport authorities. We've got a steering group with them, and we'll also be probably looking to set up some working groups with more technical and subject matter experts to really drive down into that detail. We've run a couple of open data hack events like this back in the summer, probably before I joined TFN and in the autumn, and that's with app developers to kind of engage and understand what it is that people want. And I think generally we know that customers want this data, but it has to be useful to them. So we're including them as well. Really, why are we doing this? I mean, customers are constantly telling us they want more information. No one ever says they want less information, particularly about public transport. We need to make it easier, and we really believe as an organisation that public transport is an enabler for economic growth, and that, you know, connecting people up is really important for the north of England. For operators, we really want to support them, and it's not just the big guys that we need to work with, but also the small operators that don't necessarily have access to some of those big IT teams and IT systems that are more able to provide this information. We're really interested in helping some of the smaller operators comply with the Bus Services Act, and those as you know, as it comes down the track. And as an organisation, we're committed to open data. So we have a draft open data policy at the moment, which, when it's approved, will hopefully make our data open by default unless it is commercially sensitive. So that's really what TFN wants to achieve. So on the Integrated and Smart Travel programme so far, the part that we're working on, what have we done so far? I mentioned that we've done a couple of travel hacks, which have been really successful. We've done lots and lots of engagement with operators and Travel Line and local transport authorities, talking to them about what it is that they want, and we've found that really, really, you know, a big learning process really, because there's a wide diversity out there. We started working more closely with DFT, so we've joined their project here on their program board, and they've joined ours so that we can be properly joined up. And we've also talked to a few suppliers about what's available in the market at the moment. Our next steps over the next 6 months are really going to be about finalising our specifications and starting to potentially procure stuff with some suppliers for those fairs and disruptions projects that we spoke about. We need to carry on with the engagement because that's key, because we need to bring everybody with us, I think as we've already mentioned today. And we also want to submit our final business case, which will give us that funding to take all this forward. And then moving into the second half of next year, we want to start delivering some of those projects, and also help refine some of the finer details of that secondary legislation for the Bus Services Act. So finally, I just want to go through what we've learnt so far. Basically, customers definitely want better quality information. There's no doubt about that. People are really crying out for this right now. We found that working collaboratively really works. I think just as you and the gentleman there was saying back there before, it's really, really important to bring everybody with us on this journey because there's so many different stakeholders involved. We found that a lot of operators are keen to offer a lot of these services now, and that's ahead of the legislation. So I think we can help inform some of that legislation, and that's really what TfN is trying to do now, is keen to help people deliver this information now. Operators are hugely diverse. In the north of England, we've got over 400 operators, and some of them, are, the person doing the finance is the same guy who's driving the bus. So we really need to support these people in complying with some of this, this open data agenda. Making data open is definitely a journey. We found that the door is opening much more as we push slightly. I think some people didn't potentially see the value in opening some of their data. Some people may be concerned that it might be misused or that it's commercially sensitive, but I think gradually that's coming, and I think little by little we will make a lot more data open as we go. Obviously, data's got to be accurate, and it's got to be updated. I mean, once we deliver all this, we've got to keep it fresh so that people actually want to use it. And finally, I'd just like to say, I think it's not easy. I think a lot of people say, oh, why can't we just replicate what's happened in London? And obviously, we know that the market's very different. We've got a lot more operators. So we will get there, but we've got a lot of us to bring along to the party. So that's it. Thank you.
So Alex, if you stay, we can take 2 questions, but I'm just going to feedback on a little bit there. So Alex, you weren't here for Travel Hack 1 and 2.
No.
So Travel Hack 1, we helped Transport for the North write their data strategy and their open data strategy in a day, which is amazing. Second one, we looked at fares, and we then helped work out how that specifically looked at fares across the north of England with your 400 operators and how that might be integrated. All of that's on our 2 web pages, ODI Leeds, Travel Hack and Travel Hack 2. You can all look at it, all look at the outputs. And your data strategy was published for the first time in the open on that web page for people to feed back to. So I think that shows the commitment of Transport for the North of being open. And the second one, you get the award for first pun of the day. So making data open is a journey. But so that's not too little. Yeah, the door is already open. Yeah, so 2 points there. But has anyone got any questions? We can take 2. So we've got one over here. Your name, where you from, and question.
John Birtwistle from First Group. We're working with TfN developing the open data project. Just got one question. It's sort of a point perhaps as much as a question. You're looking to develop an open data hub. As I see it, the Bus Services Act is likely to establish an open data hub. Let's make sure we don't end up with 2 competing open data hubs. Is that within your scope of work to make sure that we do one job and not 2?
It's definitely, yes. our key thing really is to try and make data open now, but without making operators do things twice, and that's a bit of a puzzle that we've got to solve. So I think us working closely together, yeah.
Yes, we're well aware of that, and I think if you ever have the time to sift through the primary legislature, there's quite an interesting little bit in there that allows us to make provision on a case-by-case basis. So what that means is, so for example, for smaller operators, we might think, oh, we need to make some special provision here. But actually, if you think about geographies and if you think about areas like the north where they might have actually jumped ahead and actually done something already in the space, we can think about how we develop a system that is complementary, and we accommodate that within rather than essentially trying to overwrite it or duplicate it. So we're well aware of that, and as Alex has said, we're working very closely together. So both programmes will evolve together.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's the power of open. So if you do it in the open, it's really easy to integrate, and when we talk about formats and compatibility, that's the way to do it. So one more question. Good. Right. We'll finish because we want to chat with Jeff. Where are you? Here he is. Thanks very much, Alex.
Thank you. Cheers.
Backs and forwards. See over there, over there.
Good morning. I've been asked to give an idea of an operator's perspective on this. I think the first thing I need to say is that I can only speak for Transdev. I've got no remit to speak for operators generally, so if the other operators here want to heckle, please feel free to do so. Just a word about Transdev. It consists of 5 companies operating in the north of England, 400 buses operating from 6 depots from the Yorkshire coast in the east over to Preston in the west. And it's a real mix of routes. We operate a service all the way from Leeds over to Whitby, and we have very short urban routes in places like Burnley and Blackburn and Keighley. No, not yet. So, what about open data? Well, we don't really have an issue with open data. I think large and medium-sized operators are likely to have systems already in place where we can export schedules data, for example, in a trans-exchange format. So we've got route, timetable and stop data that we can easily provide in an electronic form and in a standard format. We, like many operators, have got vehicle location systems, so we can provide real-time information, and again, it's in a standard format. A byproduct of that is that we've got punctuality data, and I think there's some issues surrounding that punctuality data. In a world of open data, how is punctuality going to be measured? How's it going to be measured consistently? What's the standard going to be? How is a bus that is 7 minutes late arriving in Whitby after a journey of 3.5 hours going to be compared with a bus on a local route that is 7 minutes late after a journey of 1.5 kilometres? Now, I'm not suggesting that we need sort of an elaborate delay attribution system, but how is punctuality data going to be interpreted without a system for knowing why buses have been delayed? And I think that's an important issue which has got to be addressed here. Perhaps the big challenge, though, is in fares data. And first of all, I want to dispel two notions. Firstly, I think the prime objective here is to deliver fares information in a simple way. It is not about simplifying fares structures. That's a useful debate to have, but it's not the debate that is concerned with making the data available. Secondly, there are those people who think that bus operators have always wanted to keep their fares data secret. I don't believe that's the case now, and I don't really believe it was ever the case. I think the reason it's been difficult to provide is that the data we had traditionally looked something like this. A simple fares triangle that didn't list every bus stop. It listed fare stages, and there were simply notes about return fares and day tickets. And if you wanted to know what period tickets were available, you needed another bit of paper. So there was no way that we could really simply give information to customers other than through personal contact and wanting to know where they wanted to travel. Now we can provide information electronically. And we've started to do that by providing information to Transport for the North and to Travelline so that they can incorporate this data in their own systems. What data have we got? Next slide. So we've been able to provide that fares triangle, giving single and returns in a CSV file from the data from the systems we use to program our ticket machines. We've been able to provide stop lists with NAPTAN and fare stage references, and I don't think NAPTANs have been mentioned yet. NAPTANs are a system for designating every bus stop in the country. And again, we've provided that in CSV form, or we could provide it in TransExchange. If you want network tickets, it's a relatively easy job to list all the NAPTANs within a certain travel area. Next slide. So, as I say, we're quite happy to provide that data, but I've got some questions. Can we standardise on existing data sources? Now, there may need to be something that's built into the front end of that, but the data is there already. Can we use the data that's already there? Who is going to ensure the accuracy of third-party apps? There's no point in making available to the public unless it's right. How is that going to be policed? How can we, as operators, control what our product might be associated with? If it's open to anyone to do apps and associate us with other things, other bits of advertising or whatever, how can we control that? It's our business. And finally, at the end of the day, do we need anything other than Travelline to act as a hub for this data? And to preempt the question which is bound to come, I think the way that all this can be achieved is through cooperation between all the operators, but I recognise that perhaps some help and persuasion is necessary to bring some small operators on board. Thank you.
No, you stay there a minute. Thanks. Brilliant, Jeff. Two questions. And is there another question before? Right. So we've got one question there and one question here. Okay.
Yeah,
Anzi.
so, you mentioned the comparative delays on different services and different service types. This kind of suggests that some means of delay attribution may be required when looking another question and another discussion to have afterwards, perhaps, as to what that might mean and what that might mean from a regulatory point of view as well. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the Traffic Commissioner is the regulatory authority. I think that is separate, though, from making punctuality, reliability information available to the general public, who will want to use it in a slightly different way, I think, to the Traffic Commissioner. And I think we already work with local authorities where issues arise. We can analyse our own punctuality data and illustrate why delays have been caused. Now, a classic example for those who know the Harrogate area is that our main local service between Harrogate and Knaresborough goes through a place called Starbeck, which has a level crossing which in every hour is closed for about 6 or 7 or 8 minutes, and if a train is delayed, that gets extended. And we've been able to just show exactly why buses along that corridor are not as reliable as the rest of our operation.
Thank you. Just one point on delays. I think it's really important, and Tom's going to show something later about delays, but on the other hand, we also have vague tweets from Metro telling us that our bus service in Leeds delayed by 90 minutes, which is just nuts. You know, what does that even mean? Now, how can a bus be delayed by 90 minutes? You know, so there's and whose fault's that? Yeah.
Because somebody built that car park over there.
And that's exactly that's exactly the point. So the integrated service is we're delayed by 90 minutes because we don't have a mass transit system in Leeds, which then so there's many aspects to how transport is managed and whose responsibility it is. So if it is delayed because of the transport, and that's then accepted, and we're in the open, that gets you out of the hot seat, Jeff. So I think we can help you with that. Okay, yeah, of course you can.
Yeah. Thomas Knowles from Tom Tappin Limited. We run the Open Top Bus Tour in Oxford, and recently the tour takes 1 hour just to go one circuit. Has been taking in excess of 2 hours, but the next night it'll run to time. And that is one of the things that bus operators have to contend with.
Thank you. So as we found out, it gets more complex as we go. One last question.
Yeah, Martin Buffon, I'm just here off my own bat. I'm not claiming to represent anybody. I appreciate your comment, Mr. Lomax, about the different distances that the bus undertakes. And I question whether we should have a method of, for example, slapping your wrist when your bus is late. If there is a good reason for your bus being late, I don't think anybody minds, provided you tell us why it's late. In terms of Starbeck, can I have a word with you later, please, about the level crossing? Because there's something you need to know. And I think if we eliminate this idea of wrist slapping and accept that yes, some things are going to cause delay, so therefore we have to work around getting rid of the things that cause the delay, that is a more positive attitude, because otherwise it'll end up like the franchise agreements on the railways, who are forever claiming against each other, and nobody benefits for that.
Thank you. That's a great point. So, final round of applause for Jeff, because I think that's a very good feedback. And if there are people in the discovery phase looking for feedback from operators, I think Jeff gave you some really good thoughts about how operators would like to be managed or working with or collaborated with. So over to Julie. Right, so this is the third time we've done this. You try it out. The thing.
Yes.
Right, okay, so good morning everybody. This is the third time I've done this, so I'm going to whistle through it, but the slides will be available afterwards. I just want to explain a little bit about what Travelline does, where we already are with open data, because it is a reality already in the UK and has been for nearly 8 years, and then what the challenges are towards moving towards a different way of doing it and perhaps making the data supply chain a bit more mandatory and a bit less voluntary. Okay, so Transport Information Limited is the partnership of local authorities, bus companies, passenger user groups. These are our objectives and our values. So principally we're not for profit and we're owned by the industry and managed by local authorities in the industry to try and do the best thing we can for moving people out of their cars and onto public transport. So that doesn't just include bus, it includes ferry, light rail and train. And where there's already open data like London and rail, we use theirs, we don't start again. Okay, so that just tells you a little bit more about what we're doing. We have a branded public transport service, so we have a call centre for the whole of the UK that takes about 3,000 calls a day for people who want timetables in real time and route planning. We also are an open data provider. So 7 years ago, we put together a national data set from data from operators and local authorities all over the country, so 142 local transport authorities. Sometimes it's direct from them, sometimes it's from the operator. We do a lot of stuff to that data to make it into one single national format twice a week, and we give it away for free. It's funded by the industry and by our customers. So that's the data that runs the journey planning for Google, the multimodal journey planning with bus and ferry for Google. So that already exists and it's in a trans exchange format. We also have real-time data. I'll go into that in a bit more detail later on. We've got a Travelline branded service because there are places where the market hasn't provided. So even though the data's been open for quite some time, nobody's created a national call centre. This is because it's expensive to run. So 2/3 of our expenditure is on running the call centre for about 4% of our contacts, but it's a necessary service. People still want to ring up and ask about the bus, particularly when the timetables change. They just want to speak to somebody. So we're not prepared, we're not expecting to stand that down. We've also got an SMS service which gives you live departures from stop, really simple stuff for the whole of the UK, and that takes about 3,500 to 4,000 texts a day. Again, that's funded by the industry and our customers, and then the open data services. We've got a real-time API that uses Siri SM, which is the common format that all systems that we integrate with usually provide. Behind the scenes, we're probably connected to about 40 systems, and there are about 8 different formats of data which we make into Siri SM to make available on an API. So what makes us successful? I mean, we wouldn't have open data if the UK government hadn't made it happen and said it had to happen, no matter how hard we worked. What we do best is partnership working. We listen to each other. We don't just say this is how we're going to do things. We look at the best practice in both our organisations and we listen to our customers. We've got a shared vision with the customer at the centre. It sounds trite, but it's really important because we can talk about open data and systems and what our buses can do, but if it's not going to work for our customers, it's not going to work. We've got a solid business case, which is getting people on buses and public transport. We've got a proven track record. We've never delivered late and we always deliver within budget. We've got the ability to innovate because we're quite small, and we can deliver because we've got a really good partnership. Okay, so here's the, I tried not to call it a central hub, but here is our portal for all GB data for public transport. So from there you can get the NAPTAN database, which is stops, which is owned by the DFT. You can get the coach services database, which is owned by the DFT. You get directed to rail, you can get directed to TfL's data sets, and you can download the national data set and the national operator code data set, which we own. So as such, we'll be providing data from that to the Transport for the North Hub, and I guess to whatever comes out of the discovery phase for this project. So the national data set was originally a beta, so we produced it in-house just to prove that it wasn't too difficult, even though it is very difficult. We took some test data from each of the Travelline regions and some operators, and we indexed it and found that it took a long time to process, but it wasn't impossible to do. We then persuaded the Travelline board to allow us to go to the market to find a price, and when we knew what the prices were, we were given funding to do it. So we created the national data set, and then that autumn, the Chancellor very kindly put it into his autumn statement, so we were able to deliver it and say thank you for your test data, we're now going to put it live, which worked. So it was a combination of partnership and government that made that happen. We do take it from 6 regions in trans-exchange format, including Scotland and Wales, but but we also take it direct from local authorities and operators in the northwest and consolidate it ourselves. And there is quality checking and reporting, which is really important. What we've got to be careful is that we have got quality assurance right the way through. Real-time API, pretty much already covered that. So we've got connections to 45 third-party systems. We get about 1 million inquiries a day on that. Where there's no real-time, we default to scheduled. And we combine real-time and scheduled because not every stop has, every bus visiting it has real-time information, which we tend to forget. It's all very well having real-time, but you need to be able to provide all the other stuff as well. It's been live since 2009, but we have restricted third-party use because we provide 1,000 hits a day for free, which we fund. But beyond that, we charge high-end users because we have to pay for that usage. So we released that under the Open Government Licence, so 90% of our users use it for free. As I say, the high-volume users get charged for that at cost. Okay, so we started doing fairs. This has been a project we've been wanting to do for ages. We've been waiting for a national standard. But we've just decided to get on with it. We're going to be delivering singles, returns and period fares. So the data for, initially we're going to be using the extended GTFS format because there isn't another format. Now GTFS, for those of you who are interested, is pretty limited. You can only have one product per operator and you can't have returns. So we've had to extend that with 4 additional tables to take into account those products. We've already got Wales data working in beta on our website. We're going to be including all GB and all modes, such as light rail and ferry as well as bus. I think this project for DFT is limited to bus at the moment. We have a strategic partnership with Transport for the North, which Alex has already mentioned. We're leading on operators who already have specialist software. So we're taking exports from that data and trying to find an automated way of matching that. Because tickets, data from fares software and data from scheduling software has always been separate because they're completely different manufacturers and there still isn't one that does both. So they've never had to talk to each other before in very simple terms. TFN is leading on supporting the smaller operators who probably don't have access to specialist software and providing funding and support for them to get the data into the standard format. Where we've got permission from transport operators, we'll publish that data as open and we'll give it to Transport for the North for them to publish on their open data platform and whatever comes out of this exercise as well. Ultimately, we'll use NetX, which is a European standard that combines TransExchange and fares, but we haven't got a UK profile for that yet. TransExchange can be written into NetX because the underlying model is the same. So even if we move to NetX, it won't necessarily mean requiring operators to move to NetX. We can make that conversion at a central place, if anybody wants it. Okay, so the branded travel line services, we have an online journey planner which gives multimodal journey planning from postcode to postcode all over Great Britain. We launched a basic journey planner in October 2014 and then found that our customers really wanted us to have timetable searches as well. So we added that in April 2015. We're up to about, it's probably nearer 2 million journey plans a month now. We have a journey planning widget which is essentially allows our journey planners to run on other people's sites, which organisations can brand, and we're adding fares, as I said before, early next year. This is what it looks like. That little box in the middle is the widget. You can have that running on your website and you can brand it the way you like. You can change it from rounded corners, you can change the text, and you can change the colour, so you can customise it for your organisation. So this is just to demonstrate that you can. I live in Tavistock, I don't often go to Norwich, but if I were, I know which website I'd be using. So you can journey plan, those are all the different options you've got for being able to use public transport right throughout the day. So you can see you've got a mixture of bus, coach, underground, via London, not via London. From there you can expand it to look at the breakdown of that journey. You can see where it's accessible, you can see the live departures where we've got them, and you can look up the timetable either as a PDF or in HTML format. So for us, some of the challenges of looking to doing this differently or enforcing what we've already done within the industry is making sure that we maintain comprehensive and seamless information for customers. If there's going to be a replacement of what we do, we would like to make sure that there's quality assurance to make sure it's at least as good as what we've got already, if not better. We need to make sure that data supply is maintained. At the moment, the local authorities do it because they have a provision under the Transport Act 2000 to do it. That's At the moment, that provision is on the local authority and not the operator. If it changes or it becomes slightly different, we need to make sure that they still do it at least once a week and when there are changes, not just when the registration changes. We need to ensure that common referencing is ensured. So at the moment, from each of the 142 local authorities we take data from, where a service runs through more than one local authority area, we have the data up to 4 times with a different service reference and a different operator code. So there's a lot of standardisation that goes on at the centre. The data supply chain to us is really complex in some cases. So in the simplest case, we take data direct from the operator straight into the national data set. In other places, it goes from the operator to a regional, sub-regional organisation, and then it goes into a Travelline regional organisation, and then it comes to us, so that can introduce delays in the data getting to us. Existing and emerging customer needs and technology, I mean, that's quite a big, ambiguous title, but we have to remember again to listen to what our customers want and what they're doing with the software they've already got and the kit they've already got. Funding, at the moment, is funded by our customers and bus operators, but that's not indefinite. We certainly couldn't afford to run a national API with the funding we've got. Business case for doing something with open data. The data that we've got already has been open for 7 years, and there are a limited number of apps already available. I'm told by app developers that it's difficult to make money out of apps and web services for public transport, and that one way they could do that would be to do ticket sales. At the moment, the operators prefer to sell their own tickets, so there's a gap between what the market will provide and what operators will provide. So I think just because it's open, don't assume the market will provide, because that's probably not always going to be the case, and if it's not, how do we fill the gaps? And new formats and data supply chains are always going to need a really long transition period, because it's never straightforward. Other than that, I don't see any reason why we can't make a success of how this works if we continue to work in partnership and make sure that there are standards and we keep listening to each other as well as talking. That's me.
So we've got time for 2 questions. There's one question there, and is there another question? Oh, we've got 2 questions, great. So I'll give you just... Oh, hang on a second, we'll just get the microphone.
I can hear.
All right, okay.
Thanks. So one of the reasons I'm here is to think a bit about the new flexible on-demand bus services. How are you proposing, how are you developing your service to include the data from on-demand buses like Arriva Click in Sittingbourne, and have you been talking to any of the bike share or car clubs about incorporating that data in Travelline?
So at the moment, our Travelline website doesn't include car and bike, because we're sticking with the modes we've got, because that's where our funding comes from. That's not to say we wouldn't in the future, or that other people wouldn't do that. Your first question was about demand response or flexibly routed transport. Everybody does that slightly differently. So we take the data from operators and local authorities, and it's usually with a 0 timing at principal timing points and just a start and end time. So if you see it on a map, it just looks like a big scribble. I think it's something that the Bus Services Act needs to address, because there isn't a standard way of dealing with what essentially is dynamic travel. And actually being able to have some output from the systems that book the journeys would be great, but is there a standard for that? How easy is that to do? Probably not very. We've been trying. I remember Wiggly Bus in Wiltshire 15 years ago, trying to work out how we were going to put that into a timetable, and I don't think it's got any easier, but it's certainly a challenge.
Okay, and yeah, on demand and point to point, that's really quite interesting in terms of buses. We've got Cities app and others that are growing in this part of the world.
Hi, I just mentioned taxis in there as well, but the question I was going to ask is really to the room and more directed to the data community. How many of us don't already know all about the Travelline open data system? I just show of hands sort of thing. Who hasn't heard of Travelline and the open data and isn't already aware of it? Because I think that's the fact that we are all aware of it. Yeah. There's already a thriving world of it. This wasn't a question to you, Julie, sorry.
I think but there's a few people who hadn't heard of it or hadn't seen it.
So yeah, the thing about the Travelline branded services, we don't have a marketing budget. It's on most bus stop flags where local authorities have put it on, but we've actually been concentrating our funding, which is less than £1 million a year, on delivering open data for the whole of the UK with 3 full-time staff, including me, and a call centre. So we're quite lean. So if there were to be some promotion about open data branded services, whoever that was, I think or a way of making sure it was all in one place in a consistent way of accessing it, that would be a real bonus for us.
Thank you. And I think did you know that they had a partnership with Transport for the North, and they were helping? I think that's more how Travelline is working, and for us, it's not just about it; it's what could it do next, and that's really important about how Travelline can help the Bus Services Act be enacted. And the other part of it is the collaboration part of that. So why would you set up something new when something like this already exists?
I can't answer because you've taken over.
Oh, sorry. There you go.
No, it's all right. It's okay. You made a good statement. I do appreciate it. I mean, we would like to think that what we've done has worked because we do it in collaboration, and this is what the industry and local authorities would like to do. Is that better? So, in terms of taking it into the future, I think the idea of making it mandatory in some way, making sure the standards are set out, because bus operators really want to do this stuff, and I go to a lot of conferences where they go, oh, operators won't put their fares out. They're really biting at the, they really want to do this. We've just set up something called the Operator Digital Initiative, which is being chaired by Transdev. All operators from large to small are on it. They're going to be inviting DFT and stakeholders to look at their vision for what they want for the information systems and how they would like to do it. And it's not a million miles away from what we all want to do. And so there is a consensus already. So this discovery phase would be a really interesting way of the DFT recognising some of those opinions.
Thank you. Just wait a second. Who you are, where you from?
Yeah, Richard Davis from Arriva. I just was going to add a very simple comment to that I think the blockage from certainly the larger operators in supplying that data is not the willingness for letting the data out, it's just making sure that we're clear on what legislation's coming, what formats that data is, because if that includes any investment on our part in systems or anything like that, we just need to be clear that we're investing in the right thing moving forward, and we don't go down a blind alley and end up with something that in 3 years is going to be defunct. So I think once the platform and the levels all set out, I think we're happy to wash away.
And I think again that's what we'll say. Being open makes things better because you will know and everyone will know the same thing, and that's part of the process. And I think I'll just make a point. When we first started looking at transport data, and there was a lot of the operators don't want to share, and it's not been our experience. In the 6 months we've been working in this, specifically around transport and open data, it's not been our experience that operators don't want to share. It's more that they want to be careful about how they do it. So I think there's a different nuance there. And also there are great examples. The last fares data work we did first released some data in the room while we were here. And it was more, they understood, because they were here and sharing, they understood why people were asking for the data, and they were able to share that data live on that day. So I think that experience has been that. But there is a little bit of inertia, and that inertia needs to be addressed by the operators. And the question is, why wouldn't we release this data? It needs to be asked internally, and then they should be asking who can help them do it. So, and there was a great quote from Reading Buses in London. Open data allows us to make friends with people we don't know are our friends yet. So it was more of a way of operating that does challenge a lot of the way that people are set up. So we can't run away from it, but we have not seen it as large a problem as people may expect it to be. So the next is, we'll give Julia another round of applause. Next time, sorry, we've got to go. So we're going to talk to Amit from Deloitte, who is going to talk about 3 things: the value to you as an organisation, the value of open data, and they've got some great examples. So over to you, Amit.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Amit. I'm part of the Deloitte team that are working on the discovery phase for the bus open data engagement with DFT. And I will talk a bit about the value of open data and the benefits of open data. First, let's talk about data. So why are we talking about data? So it's an explosion in data. So we see data coming from different sources. We see data coming from mobile phones, coming from GPS trackers, from sensors, from crowdsourcing. So we see many different sources of data that is becoming relevant for data providers. And we also see different use cases and different uses of data. So with the new abilities coming from machine learning, coming from artificial intelligence, we see more and more use cases for data. And I think that we are now at a stage where we're just starting to realize what can be the potential of these use cases. And finally, especially in the mobility sector, we see new uses of data and new services that are enabled by better data. So we see connected and autonomous vehicles. We see end-to-end mobility service using apps. We see smart ticketing and end-to-end journey planning, which I think it's all driven by consumer demand. And that's what really drives forward this industry based on the data. So we've done a study together with Transport System Catapult to identify the potential benefits for the UK to open up and share the data across the UK. And we identified some massive benefits. To begin, we identified that there might be thousands of new jobs, billions of pounds that can be gained through reduced pollution, reduced congestion, lower emissions, less traffic accident and safer roads. So there are massive benefits to be gained across the UK if we would be able to better share and better open up the data. And I think that the key here is that we are not yet sure about all the potential use cases, but becoming a leader in open data and data sharing would best position the UK to lead the future of transportation. Another study that we've done is not about what can be done, but about what has already been going on in the last years in London. So together with TfL, we try to identify and quantify the benefits of opening up the transportation data in London. So as you probably know, TfL opened up the transport data. They're using a unified API that is accessible by developers and third party, and provide real-time accurate data about transportation, and actually also about other data elements such as safety and pollution. And what we identify is that this data enabled developers and new services and new use cases with the likes of Google Maps, City Mapper, other apps that brought tangible and real benefits to the transportation in London, reduced time spent in congestion, and I think that again the point here is about the ecosystem. It really enabled London to lead the world in the transport ecosystem and enabled new apps and new users for the transportation data. So if it's all good, why do we see yet challenges to open up the data? So again, as part of the study that we've done with Transport Catapult, we identify few challenges. We can categorize them to three groups. The first is external barriers to share data. So we have privacy concerns with the GDPR, the Global Data Protection Regulation, coming along, and we see more and more data concerns from users. We have security concerns and cyber threat. We need, as part of the solution, we would have to identify the best way to safeguard the data, and we would also have to acknowledge the potential risks in sharing data. Another major concern is the complexity of requirements. So even when operators and providers of mobility service want to share the data, the requirements are not always clear and not always straightforward. Another group of concerns is the internal barriers. So sharing the data can be quite expensive. Setting up the system, setting up data servers, setting up the business processes to enable the data sharing can be expensive. I think the last point here is quite interesting. The benefits of sharing the data is not always internalized by the organization. So again, talking about the reduced emissions and the lower emissions and reduced pollution, these benefits are not always internalized, and that's why there is room for kind of governmental intervention to facilitate the data sharing. And the last point is, the last group is around cultural barriers. So we see organizations that are potentially thinking in silos. We see lack of consumer trust. Consumers don't always want to share the data. And there are also reputational concerns in sharing the data. But on the other end, we see the very positive turnaround to these events. We see that the private sector is interested in sharing the data, so that's quite positive. And the reason for that, again, coming and presenting that in 3 groups, so there are potential benefits for the individual companies, and I think that's really key here. Companies can really gain some tangible reputational gains. We see increased consumer demands once the data is more accessible, and once the consumers can better understand the real-time information and the fares and the prices of the services. We know that early adopters of data sharing can become leaders and really reap the benefits early, and taking a leading role in providing better services to the end users. And we also see some new entrants into the market, new services, and providers that are more kind of technology savvy, that provides new services. Apart from that, we also see a change not in individual providers, but also for the industry as a whole. So the industry understand that better information would increase the demand, the consumers' demand for public transport. And again, we already saw that happening in London after they open up the data. So it's proven, and it changed the mobility industry in London. And finally, the regulators' role. So regulators can help to facilitate the change. They can clarify the standards and the expectation from the market, and lead the way for better data sharing across the market, which I think that's why we are here today. Thank you.
So thanks, Amit. Time for 2 questions. Julie's got one there, and is there another question? Okay, Julie, do you mind shouting?
Yeah, no, I don't mind at all. Okay, so my question is, we haven't seen any presentation on the benefits of open data outside of London. But this data that we provide, the industry has been open for 7 years. Our customers are also Google, Microsoft, City Nav from that way. And I'd like to think that you would have done some work on the benefits of that already, so that we can encourage more to happen. But we always see the case study of London. So do you know if any work has been done on the benefits that we've already reaped from having done what we've done so far?
So the study that we presented is a work that we've done together with TfL. So that's an existing work that we've done, and that's something that was quantified. So that's the reason why we presented it. I think that as part of the discovery phase, we will engage with the industry. We're doing these workshops around the country, and we will also engage with local operators across the country. So I think that by the end of the discovery phase, would be in much better position to understand the impact of the processes that were done so far.
Okay, so that's going to be outside of us, so include all those.
That would.
It's integrated, isn't it? The data all works together. So the benefit of London is all of it plus.
Yeah, the discovery phase would focus on the bus industry. So that would be our immediate focus. But yeah, we acknowledge that it's part of an ecosystem, and the mobility sector, it's all interconnected.
So I'll make a point there, and the main benefit to open data is for the organisation itself releasing the data. So the main benefit to many organisations is allowing them to share internally within their own organisation. It benefits their own commercial models. It allows them to create businesses. So that's the immediate benefit. So when people say, oh, show me a benefit tomorrow, that's where we get the benefits. The longer term benefits are then wider within an ecosystem and for the economic benefits for a place. So if people want to talk to me, well, I can talk all day about that, but yeah.
I think my point was not that we're not sure what the benefits are, but it would be great to have a figure, like you've got one,
Yeah.
it's worth this much, and what you've done so far would be great, and it's been worth this much.
Yeah. So we have a hashtag London-splaining. And can we stop, please, London-splaining to us why it works? So we want to take all the great stuff that is happening in TfL, and how do we deploy that elsewhere? Now, we need to do that differently because the world is different, but I'm going to summarise your point around can we please stop London-splaining and have our own version of that? I think Miro just wants to get a point there. Have we got where's the other microphone? Ah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Obviously, I think, as you know, part of the reason why we're doing this work is because we haven't really reaped the benefits of open data for the bus community outside of London, and that's what we're trying to do. But I think as part of the discovery work, as Amit said, what we will be doing is running a showcase. So we'll be looking at not necessarily within the bus operator industry, because as you know, we certainly within the UK, those benefits haven't been realised yet. We will do some work thinking about the economic and the business case, and we'll be looking to other sectors. The rail sectors obviously see the step change in the way the public plan their journeys because of open data. But actually, if you look beyond that, if you think about banking, if you think about the way you bank now and how you banked 20 years ago, it's fundamentally different, and that's been driven by open data. So I think we'll be looking wider in transport as well. But that is part of the work that we'll be doing as part of discovery.
Okay, so I'm just running out of battery on my laptop, so we'll just get plugged in. But we're next going to listen to Tom Forth from ODI Leeds, who's got some immediate use cases and examples of how data has been used. So, let me get you... Thank you. This one actually will help.
Right. So here's an example of using open data, because so far we've talked about producing it. This is the kind of things that we can build with it. This is the first one. Wow, this is a bit fancy. The first one is this. It's on that website. It is a demonstration tool for Transport for the West Midlands, and we'll hopefully be moving that forward. Transport for the West Midlands have a real-time bus API that is free to use and that you could all sign up for now. And that gives you real-time, effectively real-time location of every National Express West Midlands bus. So that's about 90% of journeys in Greater Birmingham. What we do is I ask lots of bus stops along 2 bus routes in Birmingham every 3 minutes, when's the next bus. I then calculate how the journey times change throughout the day. So the reason that we're doing this is that Transport for the West Midlands would like to invest a lot of money in speeding up these buses. They're pretty terrible now. At peak time, you can see on that graph, this is the bus from Birmingham to where I live, by the way. So I picked the buses just for my own interest whilst we demonstrate it. The scheduled time is always 13 minutes for this journey. You can see that at 4:30 in the morning, the correct time is 13 minutes. So at 4:30 in the morning, the buses are great. I don't generally anymore want to come back from central Birmingham at 4:30 in the morning, so that's not great. What we find is that at peak times, the buses then go up to 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 60 minutes. I spoke to the bus manager at National Express in the West Midlands. He was telling me that they now have to run 3 times as many buses to provide the same amount of service as they provided 30 years ago. So he's quite a more experienced gentleman in the bus world. He can remember running those buses a long time ago. Obviously, that's 3 times the cost for them. So why are we doing this? We want to be able to say to individuals using open data, yeah, the bus is going to take you longer than the journey planner says it's going to take. We want to say to the city, this is how you slam down a business case at Department for Transport and ask for some money to improve your buses. And we want to say to the bus operators, this is how you say that you can't run as fantastic a bus service as you want because you have to put on 3 times as many buses and the costs of it, and no one takes them because it takes them an hour. This is all powered by open data. If there wasn't open data, the Transport for the West Midlands API, we couldn't run this. No one asked me to build it. We built it because there was a desire. Once people can see that it's there, there are people who are interested in buying the full tool, developing it, and we release the code openly. So next thing. This one is powered by Travel Lines Open Data. We've been doing this for a while. We take Travel Lines Open Data on every bus route in the UK. In this example, it's the #1 bus route in Leeds. We take the green circles are where everyone lives, the orange circles are where every job is, and we assess how well every bus route in Leeds connects people with jobs. So this is a big part of the city and other cities thinking about what is the purpose of public transport. And a big purpose, in fact, the stated reason for Transport for the North's existence is to drive economic growth, to get people into better jobs and to get more people having good jobs. So this tool, because of open data, again, doesn't require any licensing permission. We can just go on and do it. And we look at every bus route in the whole country. So the first thing was powered by Transport for West Midlands API, open data on bus location. You can also use Transport API as another example of a place where you can get real-time information on buses. This one uses Travel Line Open Data and Office of National Statistics Open Data to look at how good bus routes are. And then this is a new thing for West Yorkshire, which has just been released about 3 or 4 weeks ago. It was a bit of a slog to get there, but I think it's very interesting. If you pay for your bus journey on a concessionary travel pass, that data is collected. And because the state paid for the journey, the state has a right to release that information. That's what we're currently working on. So what we did was we took a 1-month chunk, just January of this year, and we released, anonymised, every single journey on a free bus pass in West Yorkshire. So there's about 2.5 million journeys there. We have taken off the person who made the journey. We've anonymised the times. You only get a 30-minute timestamp. This has already shown us some really interesting things. We know which bus routes are most used by which people. We know when people are using the buses. If you're a city and you are thinking about the importance of public transport for inclusion and providing services to people with free bus passes, then knowing where they use it is absolutely critical to you achieving that goal. You need to know whether people can get to the library, dinner club, meeting, get to the swimming pool, etc. with the buses. Now, the reason why open data is so good for this is because the bus operators already know this. The transport department in the combined authority may even already know this, but the health and social care team in the department is now 2 or 3 steps removed from where the data was created. So by making it open, we reduce those 3 or 4 steps of data coming off a bus into a health and social care department, and we make it a 1-step process that gets us here. So there are 3 examples of actually using open data to do things. I would love all the open data. For me, the interesting part of this process is that we've already done some great stuff. Travel Line is a fantastic resource for all of the timetables. It will be a fantastic resource for fares data. We've already got the start of looking at usage data. I understand that all usage would be commercially sensitive, but there's a discussion to be had about whether some usage data could be useful to share as open data. That's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And just if you want to know more about the concessions data, our data team here in Leeds, so Stuart with Dan and Tom have been looking at that. So we've written up a blog post about that. Went up at the end of November. So we've described how we've dealt with personal data, visualizing data. There's an actual tool online with a link to it, but this is quite interesting. It's just showing different bus uses. So when people use that bus. So before that data was available, we didn't know that. And we're seeing, obviously, there's a kick up at 9 o'clock or 9:30 when they work. Some are very smooth, but then seems to be after 10 o'clock on the 321, there's a big kick up in usage. But why is that? And we would not have been able to see that previously.
And because it's open data, we can just look up where the 321 goes because it's on Travelline. We don't even have to ask Yorkshire Tiger. It's on Travelline. We just look up, show me where the 321 goes. We could try and figure out why people only use it at night.
And then there's this sort of thing which, because we've done this sort of thing before, we can just, we've selected a service, so whichever one it is. So I sometimes get the 3. And that shows what's being used, the numbers, and then that's versus all concessionary travel underneath that. So let's have a look at this. And that's because we have data and a machine's doing this, no one's actually doing this. Now I'm sure there's a lot of people who might be interested in that and how actually using data we can stop. And we know there's lots of fudges that go on about how you pay for it, how you do it, assessments. This is just the actual data and it is published. And we've got Simon in the room. He says we've got a whole load of new data that's going to be published, and then with additional data sets that are linked to this. So this is very limited at the moment, but we might get age groups, and I think we've got gender on there at the moment. But there's other parts we can start seeing who's using this data and who's not, and who's using the buses. So that's just a great example of by publishing it and working with partners, we can start getting more things done, and then also answering questions that we didn't know we wanted to know the answer to, if you like. So we've got time for 2 questions of Tom. We've got a question here. You pass that one over, and there you go.
So is this working?
Yep.
So I was interested in the West Midlands. How are you working with the team implementing the mobility as a service solution in the West Midlands to bring the buses into a combined service with the trains and the next bikes, which they're proposing to have on the streets of the West Midlands, and the trams and everything like that?
That is a great question, and the answer is that I know Stu Lester pretty well, who does quite a lot of work in this area at Transport for the West Midlands. At the moment, I am focusing just on their API and bus journey times. They are going to have to sort out the rest of it. I have my own bicycle for cycling around. I do think this is a question that we need to think about. We talked about it a lot at the first event in London, and that is that obviously having a Transport for West Midlands API lets me do some really interesting things. I want more data, and one way to do that is to say you have to publish loads more data for me. But if we write a law that says in order to run a bus you have to publish the fares and the timetables, and then you start having mobility as a service and on-demand bus services as a thing where the timetables are flexible and the fares are flexible, we are obviously moving into a new world. They are aware of it, they are thinking of it. I think we need to get that input in. We had Arriva Click, the Sittingbourne example at the London event, so they had some great input on that. It's on the collaboration document for London. We'd love to get more of that in for Leeds, and this is the time to make sure that we don't make a terrible mistake that says you can't run a bus service unless your fares are open data 3 months in advance, because that would be bad, because then you couldn't run mobility as a service. So let's get it right now.
Thank you. We've got one more question. So, I'll pass that one over. Martin?
To the room in general, not necessarily, and you as well, Tom. Yeah. Has anybody done any work on analysing, obviously the 9:30 spike is because it's 9:30 and concessionary tickets kick in. But has anybody done any work in analysing what the other spikes are? For example, are people going out for lunch? Are they going to a specific event?
So, we got the data 4 weeks ago, and the answer to your question, therefore, is no, not yet. But there's something quite exciting that's happening. In that data set, we kind of know where people get on the bus, because it gives a fare stage. But fare stage doesn't really mean anything to us, because what we want to know is a NAPTAN number for a bus stop. And all the bus operators seem quite happy to publish their fares data, which will require NAPTAN numbers and fare stages to be lined up. So what we get is, by working over there on something completely different, which is how do we publish open fares data, so that's the work at Travelline Wales and the work with Transport for the North and Travelline, we will be able to answer your question, and we will never have had to ask Julie or anyone at Travelline to solve our problem for us. Because it's all open, we just get the answer. So for the moment, we don't know where people get on the bus. Once the fare stages are linked to NAPTAN numbers, we'll know where people get on the bus. And I think at that point, we will start to see where it is they are presumably coming home from at 4:30. We'll know that. But not, as of yet, we haven't got it. I reckon 4 months. How long's the TFN stuff going to be, do you reckon, Julie? Yeah. Ooh. Oh, that is a whole new world of pain. Yeah, we'll only be able to know where people got on the bus. There are some people who try and match them up. It's beyond my wits. I'll leave it to other people to do that.
Okay. So
except in Nottingham. Always Nottingham. In Nottingham, on some buses, you have to tap in and tap off the bus. And so there they do have full journey length data. Oysters only tap on a bus. Yeah. In Nottingham, they have some buses which are tap on and tap off. Lancashire as well.
Rosso bus are here, they're in the room. That's good. Rosso bus are here, right. Is Jordan in the room? Here he is.
The reason that you only tap on a London bus is because you get off the bus at the back of the bus, and there's only a reader at the front of the bus. And also, it's £1.50, so you only need to tap on because it's always the same price. That's why.
Yeah. So Simon's going to tell us all about that in a minute. And yeah. Hey, welcome to Leeds. That's a good point. Yeah. Okay, so next up is Jordan from Transport Focus. As Tom, no, there we go. This thing is working. Yeah, backwards and forwards. So over to Jordan from Transport Focus.
Thank you. So good morning. As I've already been introduced, I'm Jordan from Transport Focus. As you see from the title, what I'm just going to be quickly talking about is what bus passengers actually need from open data. And the clue kind of sits to the end is they're not interested in open data as such. Most passengers obviously don't know what it is, but what they are interested in is better bus journeys and better information which can be facilitated potentially by open data. So very quickly, who are Transport Focus? We're the independent statutory watchdog representing transport users across Great Britain. We represent rail passengers, which is what my normal day-to-day job's about. But for the purposes today, what you need to know is that we represent the interests of bus passengers in England outside of London. So how do we do this? The 3 bullets at the bottom try to explain that effectively we conduct research with passengers, we ask them what they think about services, we use this robust evidence base to then represent those views to transport operators, to government, and all in the aim of being useful and actually making a difference, being listened to, influencing changes for the benefit of passengers. So one of the key pieces of work that we do, I just want to briefly touch on, is Bus Passenger Survey, which is a once-a-year survey across England of bus passengers' views about their services. So we asked them on the bus, how satisfied were you with the journey today? So you can see that's the figure there, 87%. So that was the score. Nearly 9 out of 10 passengers were satisfied with the journey they were undertaking on that day when we asked them that question. Representative of all passenger journeys made in various local areas of England. So quite a good score. You know, I think most people would agree it's better than satisfaction on rail actually, which is lower. But the value for money score, which I'll come back to later, is much lower at 65%. And you see punctuality on the left-hand side, 73% of passengers satisfied with the punctuality of their bus on that journey, and it's actually in decline. It was 75%, the figure in grey, the year before. And that's obviously, it feeds into the conversation we've already been having about patronage and about congestion and the challenge that bus faces. So one of the other pieces of work we do regularly is a piece of work called Bus Passengers Priority for Improvement. So this is where we ask passengers, thinking about the journeys you make on the bus, what things would you like to see improved? What are the most important things? So this on the screen there is the top 10. There's many more than these, but these are the most important. So you see the first one, better value for money bus journeys. I'll come back to that. And then the next 3 are kind of about the core product. It's about more buses arriving on time, more buses running on time once you're actually on it, and buses running more often than they do now. So it's a kind of that core product of the bus being there and being reliable. And after that, other parts of the experience where information will be relevant is more bus stops with next bus displays and better information when delays occur. So again, information requirements that the open data might be able to help with. And then other parts of it, number 6 and number 10 in the priority list, buses going to more places that you want to go to, and tickets that allow travel on other bus operators. And so there's 2 parts to that. There's the actual those services or those tickets being available, but there's actually also knowing about them. So again, coming back to information, maybe those things already exist, but passengers aren't actually aware that there's an option there they could use. So coming back to better value for money, you see the notes at the bottom there. We did some work in 2012 asking people, passengers, what is it that they mean by value for money? What would they actually like to see improved that would make them think that the service was better value for money? And some of the answers, some of the recommendations that we made to the industry and to government were about information. So it's about having this central amalgamated source of fares, routes, data online, a clearer ticketing structure, real-time information consistently across the country, and a better payment system than cash. So I mean, one thing to point out is that was 2012, and yes, some progress has been made in places, but I think those recommendations still stand, and Transport Focus still sees a lot of need for improvement across the board there. So the next few slides I want to talk about a piece of research we haven't actually published yet. It's forthcoming in January or beginning of February, where we've been talking to young passengers. So actually 14 to 19-year-olds, which is something new for us, normally difficult to do research with people under 18. And one of the things that we've been finding is actually what they say is quite representative of a lot of passengers, but just more acute. So about how they actually go about planning a journey. I won't kind of go through all of it, but they're looking at what's most convenient, what's quickest, but actually how much it'll cost is a really big part of a young person planning a journey. They're much more price sensitive potentially than some of us in the room might be. Money's scarcer, and where do they go to ask, to look for information about buses and how to actually make journeys? First of all, friends and family, then Google Maps, and only then National Rail Inquiries, Travel Line, kind of travel websites. So obviously some of the information there is linked up, as we've already heard from Julie, but actually where people are looking isn't necessarily where the industry might like them to look. You know, if they had an absolute free choice about them coming to their own specific app or their own specific website, and it's important to think about getting the information to where passengers are looking for it anyway. And this lack of awareness about where to look at the moment, and the caution from young people about apps, about data and about space on their phones, and actually needing a really good reason to download one. Okay, just a few quick kind of questions there, the how do I type of questions. They're all types of passengers, but I think particularly young passengers are more likely to be asking about bus services. And they see the picture there, which is a bit flippant in a way, but that's the type of information that a lot of passengers do see about bus services. At bus stops, maybe not particularly easy for me to read, to be perfectly honest, but it's certainly not the type of information that a lot of young people like to look at. It's not the type of way that they're used to digesting information. And they want to know all the usual types of things. Is the bus going to come on time? Is this printed timetable I'm looking at in front of me, is it correct? When's my stop? We found a lot of passengers like to actually look on Google Maps while they're on the bus and kind of track themselves along the journey. But it's all in information requirements. So I'm talking about outputs, of course, but it's a question of how open data and the provisions of the bus services bill might actually help to get this information out to passengers, young or old. So my last slide, there are some of the recommendations that we're going to be looking to make as part of this young person's bus research. The top two are highlighted there. They're the ones which are information related. But the key thing to stress, I suppose, is that these are things which actually would benefit all passengers. It's just that younger passengers might feel it more acutely. Just to kind of to explain that a bit more, one of the things that we found really strongly in talking to young passengers is actually that they feel really quite anxious about getting onto the bus and asking questions. And so that experience of getting on and maybe not having exactly the right fare, or maybe this isn't actually the right bus, and asking those questions, it's kind of a socially awkward thing. Young people are more sensitive to that than most people. So what they really want to know, they really want this clear, streamlined information and communication of bus routes, times, which operator, how much it's going to cost, and this sense that it's a network, really, and it's easy to use. And really, from our point of view, the aim of this work stream should be tied in closely with the second recommendation there, which is really that to release extra information, or to make information easier for all passengers to digest, so that it builds confidence in passengers, so they're happy that they've got the right information, and it's easier for them to make perhaps unfamiliar journeys, which you might actually at the moment kind of fall back on using a train or a car or an Uber, rather than doing the hard work of researching which bus might get you there and then how to actually go about making that journey. So that's me. Happy to answer any questions.
So some really interesting insights there about what people actually want. That's really important. I was really fascinated by your picture of a bus timetable there. Wickes currently has a contract out for, I don't know how much it's for, maybe 30, 40, 50,000 pounds for the printing of the bus locations and timetables in Leeds and Yorkshire. It's just quite interesting. I wonder if anyone who's printing that data is actually talking to us or Travelline about where that data is from, and could we have done that differently within the organisation? Looking at Lisa and Simon over there. Simon, yeah. But and I think it's just the way the benefits of data. So if that money's going to get spent, and because people feel they have to spend it, but could it be done in a different way? And could those outputs be powered by the data that we all share and we know is probably more correct? So an interesting point.
The other way around is the information that goes into Travelline is driven by the sources that have generated that data.
Yeah.
Equal both ways.
Yeah.
So that integration already happens.
But it's also whether people, that might not be but people using those, once we printed that on a poster, that's it. Is it fixed? And how do we update that? And how do people use that? And it's what people expect of the information. So Any more questions for Jordan?
Just quickly on that kind of confidence point as well. Yeah, this morning I actually caught the bus to the station in Manchester, and I did use the paper timetable because I just got up, hopefully, and I was lucky that there was a bus coming soon, even though it was quite early for me. But it's about presentation as well. It's about confidence, you know, about how refreshed does it look. You know, do I believe it's up to date in the way that I might believe it if it's live and I can refresh it and see the buses getting closer? It's not about one format being better than another necessarily. You know, it's different users have got different needs.
Yep. Okay, we got time for a couple of questions. So we got one at the back. Can we get a microphone over there?
I was interested in the observation.
Just can you tell us who you are, where you're from, and your question? Yeah.
I'm Peter Bell from Trapeze. I was interested that you said that people wanted better information, and then you listed all the things. And I think Julie, if she had got here before me, she would have pointed out that with the exception of fares, Travelline does provide all that information. Two questions going from that. Did you explore why people felt they didn't have access to the information? And also, did you look at the brand awareness of things like Travelline versus Google versus Citymapper and so on?
We didn't kind of dig into different brands' kind of level of awareness specifically, but you can see from the kind of places that people go to that I think the finding in terms of young people was that bus doesn't have that kind of easy place to go and look in the same way that, say, National Rail Inquiries or the train line does for rail. It doesn't have that immediate sense, and of course we know that in this room that Travelline has got an awful lot of the answers that people are looking for, but it's not necessarily the place that young people are looking first. It's Google Maps is the way that they're used to thinking about their mobility, really. That they go to that before they go to Travelline.
And it's also when you if you've got limited space on your phone, the number of apps you have, you limit the number. How you manage your data is really important to young people. But they don't want to put lots of apps on different apps on their phone. They just want one or two, and that's really important for them. And we need to listen to how they use that information.
Was there a second part of that I missed? Sorry. Okay.
Okay, so if we are about finished, we've got one question from Bill at the front here. Just passing that mic.
Is there a danger that we're moving away from paper timetables because not everybody, and I'm including myself in this, in the age group, they don't necessarily want to be looking at mobile phones. They prefer to have a pocket timetable, which you mentioned yourself you'd use.
Yeah, I think there is a risk. You know, there's definitely trade-offs to be made, and I think what we find amongst all passenger types when we talk to them is what they really want is real-time information at the bus stop. You know, they want a digital display saying when the bus is coming. And clearly that's not possible just tomorrow to go out and roll that out at every single bus stop. But ultimately that's what all types of passengers want. Even ones that have got a smartphone in the pocket, they'd rather just go and look at the bus stop.
Thanks very much. So we are next up is our final quick talk, lightning talk, is Simon from TfL, who's going to tell us about their journey. And you can London explain, but you're welcome.
Okay, can I have just a show of hands? How many operators have we got in the room? Great. Can you keep your hand up if you've got less than 100 buses? Okay, if you've got less than 50 buses? Okay. So when I talk about this, London, massive place, loads of money and everything else, and I do understand I'm the lightning conductor of hate when I come to the north, but our smallest two operators, one's got 20 buses, the other's got 7. Okay, so everything I'm talking about, my problem is trying to make it ubiquitous from everybody from Go Group to Arriva, down to Uno, down to the smallest bus operator. We're trying not to make, and never have done, make ticketing or any of the operations that we do, anything that debars any of the smaller operators that we have. So all this is possible, and I just think that's something we should take away. I've just been given a device which I couldn't possibly use, so I hope that one is. That's fine, mate. I'll just run you through a couple of points, though, just to give you an idea. In terms of scale, Transport for London as a transport authority, yes, there's enormity around it, but I think that point about bus operators, please don't lose sight of it, that we do try and encompass from the smallest routes that we have school routes with single journeys right the way down to the 100 or so 24/7 routes. But the purpose of the authority is not just to provide a transport network for its sake. It is there purely to provide a service to Londoners to improve the demographics and to improve the prosperity of the city. That is our utmost aim. So everything we try and do, I was really interested in some of the conversations that were kicking off saying about the bus focus. Most of our stuff now is we're trying to think of all modes and how you bring those together. So what we have done, if you talk specifically about the Bus Act, the last time we updated our information services was with a design in 2008, and I would imagine everybody has had at least one of those in their world. So it's a bus does something, tells some information to a back office system, and you do your best to get it out to the customers in whatever way you can. So for real time, that was the architecture that we had. And it was only, you can imagine if we awarded that contract in 2009, we were doing that work in 2007-8, and some bloke called Steve Jobs got up and invented a little device around that time called the iPhone, which of course didn't exist, just in that short frame ago. So there was no thought of having apps and stuff like that. We thought SMS was pretty on the edge at that time. So as we've moved on, we recognise that is just never going to work, and neither does that sort of architecture. So what we were trying to do was to work out what the best way was just for dealing with the London amount of data that we had. And really the only thing to draw your eyes to there is the middle line. What we've done is put together a single API that we provide all of our real-time information via. So it's that sort of idea of a single portal. And below that, we've got all of our operational systems that do just whatever they do. And above that is where we throw it out to anybody else that can consume it. So my bus data, the bus real-time data, the bus timetables, they all come from systems. Some of them are over 25 years old. They still work quite nicely, thank you. So we haven't invested in those at all. What we did was invest in that middle layer to get a single view of that data out to the market. So if you're worried that you've got old systems, yeah, me too, got loads of them. So, it is just trying to get the right technology at the right layer for going forward. So what we've done with the system that we started with in 2009, there is some bit of cloud hosting there, but that's just simply because it's cheaper to do it. But now you can see what we do is, yeah, we've still got the SMS service. That still gets about 30,000 hits on a wet Friday. But we've got everything from our own digital signs, the TfL website, and the API that we provide to everybody is all coming off the same source of data. So the source of data hasn't changed at all. We've just looked at the best way of delivering it. For those of you looking at your phones now, if you're bored and needing friends on Facebook Messenger, if you look for TfL Travel Bot, it's our latest thing to try and use bot technology to provide a conversationalist interface for customers. So to use that, it's taking just that data feed. So you can say to it, you can also ask it to, you can ask to marry it, you can tell it that you're lost, you can try all sorts of things. That's the AI bit gets in there. But it just takes the same data source. So you get the same information if you're at the bus stop and you've got one of those signs. You get the same information if you've got the app, if the same information if you've got the travel bot. Doesn't make any difference. It's all coming from the same point through that architecture that we put together. And that's the way we've approached it. There are other ways out doing it. If you were doing it with a greenfield, you wouldn't start with this. But it's got us to the point where we needed to be. Oh, I don't bother with that. So where we've gone now is that approach is now happening with all of our services. We were mentioning cycling earlier. All of our docking information stations, all the docking stations, all that data goes through the same interface. So if you make an inquiry about a station that's got perhaps an underground service with it, may have National Rail and may have a bus service and also cycle information, you can get that out of one effective call to that thing. But what we don't do is we don't control the output from it. So we're not expecting in London is for you all to have a TfL app. Until very recently, we didn't do any at all. So Londoners reportedly have got over 60% of our travellers on bus use an app to make some sort of decision about their journey. But they don't tend to use ours. As people said earlier, it's either Google's or in London, City Mapper is fairly ubiquitous. Bus Checker, there's quite a lot. If you talk to a Londoner, they will have their own favourite app. Me, I have a hot link to Travelline, obviously, on my phone. I think Ursula does it. And as I go back to the point, just to finish up, is that our job is not just to provide the travel industry. Somebody said right at the very start that we were forced to do this. That's quite true. It was actually, dare I mention his name in this place, it was Boris that kicked this off with a lady called Emma Coleman, who set up the London Data Store. and they demanded that all of the mayor's executive agencies published all their data. So that was where our drive came from. And what it basically did was it kicked off a whole sort of area of, there was a whole industry arriving of people taking data and making specific apps. And we know through both the work that Deloitte has done and others that have done, but it actually did provide us a job fillip at the time that we really needed it. And it did kickstart that whole sort of Shoreditch, sort of small companies and startups using our data and taking them forward. So the figures, you've probably seen them on the Deloitte reports, etc. But it really has provided both Londoners with the information they need, provided some economic and social benefit into London as a vibrant city, and it's also enabled us as the operator to actually reduce the costs of information distribution. And I must admit, when I first started in open data, I was right to the far of the most cynical person in the history of the universe. But over the years, I've now become a firm adopter, and I would recommend it to anybody that's considering going down that route. That's it from me. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got time for one question before we get into the working session. Does anyone have a question for Simon?
I thought it was going to be who was the operator with 8 buses, but
no. But who is? Come on then.
It's Uno, one of the university ones. They came over and they used to run their own services. They now run some around North London. Sullivan's is also another one, small family-owned business, and we've got others that come in and out of the service.
Fantastic. So I think we'll just give a round of applause to all of the speakers. I'm hoping that everyone's learned something this morning that they didn't know before they came, or they found out something, or they understand a bit more. Before we get another cup of tea, can I just ask people to put a hand up if you're sat next to someone you know or work with? Okay. Could you go and find a seat and sit next to someone you don't know or you haven't worked with, please? Mira, Sherry, so we need our Tom. Where are the Deloitte people? Oh, thanks very much, Bill. Gianfranco, need you. That works pretty well, doesn't it? Okay, can people stop making tea and come on? We're not working yet. Come on, Alex. Apologies for that. Because we're going to do we've got an hour's work to do before we finish. Okay.